And they were signing contracts. And how I met him was that I had to bring my uncle's car to the hotel, and I had the keys for the safe that they were unlocking upstairs. And when I went up there with the car, a gentleman came down and he took the keys from me, and I was sitting in the car. And about maybe 20, 30 minutes later, a Winnebago appeared with two
And
cars.
of course,
I'm sorry?
of course.
And a man came up to the car asking me and then telling me to move the car, that they were in a hurry. And I explained to him, I says, what do I have to move the car for? And he started screaming and yelling at me and threatening me, telling me he was going to kick my ass if I didn't move the car, that they had to get in there. And I explained to him, you can't talk that way to me, Aunt. This is a family's hotel. And an older guy got out of the car and he started yelling at him when he saw I was only a kid. And he turned around, he said, son, he says, can you please move the car? We have an important engagement here. He says, we have to see somebody regarding some personal matters and some papers that we have to sign. And I said, like contracts? And he goes, yes. And I said, well, I had to drop keys off here and I'm waiting for them to bring the keys back down. I can't move the car. And I said, this guy's screaming at me and threatening me, and he's got no right to come here and threaten me with all this. He goes, I'll take care of him. And then he says, son, you know who I am? And I said, no. And he goes, have you ever heard of Elvis Presley? And I said, yeah, sure I have heard of Elvis Presley. I said, why, are you Elvis Presley? And he just looked at me for about 15 seconds and he started smiling. He goes, no, son. He goes, I'm Elvis's father. I'm Vernon. I said, yeah, right. He turned around and he goes, Elvis is in the other vehicle. Would you like to meet my son? I said, yeah, sure. And I'm figuring the guy's lying to me. So he walked over to the Winnebago. He opened up the door and he said something in there, and then he waved me to come to the Winnebago. And when I walked up there, I'm figuring I was going to tell this guy where to go. When he opened up the door, my mouth dropped open. And Linda Thompson was sitting on Elvis Presley's lap. And he shook my hand and he goes, I'm Elvis Presley. And he goes, man, I'm awful sorry. And that he said that, my friends gave you a hard time. He goes, they just didn't know. I apologize. And he goes, when we get done signing these contracts, he goes, why don't you come upstairs? And Eddie says, come upstairs and see us. So guy came down, gave me the keys back. They went upstairs and I drove the car back to my aunt's house. And I told my aunt that I had met Elvis Presley. And my aunt goes, you got to be kidding. And I said, no. And he wants us to come upstairs and he wants us to meet them in the penthouse for later on. So my aunt got dressed in it, and I took a shower and everything, and later on we went back to the hotel and we were in the penthouse all night with him, talking to him and that's how I first met him. And he was a fantastic guy. He was decent. He came to me I was sitting there was a bar there and I was sitting there, and he asked me, he goes, how old are you? And I was either 16 or 17. And he turned around, he goes, you can't drink now. I said, no, sir. I said, I don't touch alcohol to begin with. And he goes, do you want a Shirley Temple? And I looked at him, I said, come on, a Shirley Temple. And he started laughing. And I think I had Pepsi or something like that. And he sat, and you couldn't keep your eyes off him. As a man, he was breathtaking, handsome. But you could tell he had a nice aura about him. And he was just a simple guy, and he was really, really decent. And he was in Vegas for almost 2 weeks, and it was during August. So when August 8th came, my birthday, and I went to the hotel and I saw him in concert. I saw him like 4 times in concert while we were there. And then he turned around, my sister was with us, and my sister said, gee, she says, I'd like to go back and see him and that. So when we would talk to him after the show was done, we'd all go upstairs to where everybody was. And Joe Esposito was his road manager. And Joe turned around, he says, you guys don't have to pay to come in and see him. He says, you never pay. He says, we'll get you behind stage. And they set a little table up for my sister and I, and they sat us next to the curtain. So we watched him sideways in concert. We had it made there. That was my 15 minutes of fame with them. And then he told me and he told my sister and that, he goes, if you ever come to Memphis, always come say hi to me. You can always come and say hi. And he goes, just call ahead of time and let them know that you're coming. And he goes, I'll let everybody know. And I got to meet Vester, his uncle. He was the head man that ran the gate at Graceland. And I got to meet everybody and that. And I even met his ex, Priscilla. I met her several times, and she was very, very decent to us. And I knew Lisa. I knew Lisa from the time she was born. The last I seen Lisa, she was 9 years old, and that's when we were at the funeral. And Lisa, she was a cute little kid. And I used to ride the golf cart in back, and we used to go in back where the barn was, and he had two horses back there. They had Domino, that was Priscilla Presley's horse, and they had Rising Sun, that was his golden Palomino. And Nancy Rook, the cook, she used to give us bags of carrots, and we would ride the little scooter. We would ride the golf cart. We'd ride it back, and we would feed the horses the carrots and stuff like that. So I had good memories. I had very, very good memories. I saw things in him that were personal, and as a synopsis, when he passed, my mother, she was called by several of the magazines. I was called and my sister to ask us to talk about him. We never did.
So they wanted dirt on him.
Well, that's what they wanted. They wanted dirt. And I'm going to tell you point blank, and I don't care who believes it and who doesn't believe it, and that. He was just a man. I asked him one time what he thought of his stardom, and he told me, you know what I am? He said, I was just a GD millionaire hick that happened to be there at the right time and right place. And he said, if I never made it again and I lost everything, I'd be a truck driver again. And I remember sitting at the dining room table, and we were all having dinner. And I was just a young kid, and I saw all these rings on his hand. And I said, Elvis, why do you have all that flash on you? I said, you got some beautiful stuff on you. And I said, what's that little ring on your baby finger? And he goes, that's my beautiful ring. And I go, what is that? And he took it off, and he passed it down the table, and it was a star sapphire Buddha. And I gave it, I looked at it, and I never saw anything like it, and I gave it back to him. And when we left to go back home, he says, come here a minute. He goes, I got something for you. He goes, it's between me and you. And my Uncle Chris had shit fits about it. He said, no, he's not taking anything. We're not like your friends. We're not hanger-ons. Nothing like that. He said, this is for you. And he goes, no, he didn't ask for anything. This is between me and him. And that's the first piece of jewelry I ever got from him. And then over the years, we just kept on going to visit him all the time. And we saw him in California. We'd seen him in Vegas. We went down. We were in Palm Springs with him. And my aunt and uncle, they went to Hawaii with him. I missed Hawaii on the one tour. I was in summer school and I couldn't make it. But my family thought the world of him. But people would ask us all the time about the dirt on him. And we never said nothing in that. People would ask us about the drugs all the time. I said, we never seen any drugs that he did. I imagine a lot of stuff they said about him could have been true, but who knows, and that. Even if it was true and I saw it, I wouldn't have said anything.
That's right.
Because it wasn't for me to say anything. And he knew that if he had your confidence, you could rate your ticket with him. If you told him that you liked something or something like that, he would let one of his entourage know. And I remember a story that there was I don't know the man's name, but he was a newscaster. And I think he was either from Colorado. I think it was from Colorado, if I recall. And he said, Elvis, if you're giving out cars, man, I could use one of my cars shot. And Elvis heard that. And he told Joe Esposito to get a hold of some dealership down wherever the guy lived. And he says, get him a car. And it made the news. What made him so famous just wasn't his looks or his sound or his music or whatever in that. But people idolized him because of his generosity and his good nature. He never refused an autograph. I used to see people hound him for autographs, and he'd walk down to the gate. And he turned around, he goes, I'm not going to refuse these people. These are my friends and my fans that made me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. And you don't see a movie star today that'll
That's
talk
humble
about-
like him, right?
Yeah, he was humble pie.
Yep.
He was humble pie in that. His dad was a character. His dad, Vernon was a tough dude. Vernon was afraid he was going to lose everything. Elvis was going to give everything away and they were going to be poor again. That's what Vernon always worried about.
So that was his biggest fear.
And I remember a story when we were there. They had 2 dogs. They were guard dogs. And I remember his dad was walking in back. There used to be an old outhouse. They turned into a smokehouse. And they used to get hams, fresh hams. They used to smoke them. And I remember Vernon was walking back from the smoking house, and he had the hams on his hand. And I remember the dogs. Dogs went after Vernon because they smelled the ham. And one of them got the ham off. It had like a rope Vernon was holding, and they knocked Vernon down, and one of the dogs got the ham and ran with it. And Vernon grabbed the other hand. He was holding it in his chest, running into the house. And he came in the house, and he was screaming bloody murder that the dog took the ham. And he woke Elvis up, and Elvis came downstairs, and I'd never seen him ever in a fit of rage. And he was screaming and yelling at Vernon that, you woke me up about lousy MF hams and all that stuff. He goes, I could buy 1,000 hams. He goes, yeah, but they took the hams. I want those goddamn dogs and that. I want them, out of here or whatever. And he goes, I'll get rid of you before I get rid of the dogs. He said, the dogs stay. He goes, I don't care, Dad, but I remember that it was the
Soul on your
it was
foot.
the hams that the dog took.
As he goes
And I
away.
remember George Klein. George Klein was there. He was Elvis's best friend from high school. George Klein was a nice guy. I got along with George extremely well. But I got along with everybody there. Everybody there, they were just decent. They treated my mother, my sister, and myself like gold. And that was our 15 minutes of fame of meeting them.
What was the name of the dogs?
Hmm?
What were the dogs' names?
Coke and Pepsi.
Ah,
Coke and Pepsi were the dogs' names. And that, my sister had the opportunity when she had met him, and that he had a monkey. He had a chimp. Scatter was the chimp. I never met the monkey, but my sister saw the monkey once. And she asked Elvis, she goes, what's that thing that's roaming the house? Looks like an ape in the backyard. He goes, that's my monkey Scatter. And a lot of the entourage, they taught that monkey to do dirty things. And the monkey would go up to the girls and he'd try to put his hands up their dress or try to pinch their boobs or whatever and the monkey would drink and everything, my sister said. And I said, did the monkey ever go after you? She goes, no. She said, but I seen the monkey go after 2 of the girls at Elvis's friends, and they were screaming and laughing and that. Yeah, monkey's name was Scatter. And I read that in the books. He had a monkey. I mean, I never saw it, so I don't know. But
did you ever meet his mother?
no, she was dead. She died in, I think, 58 or 59, she died. And I was only like 7 years old, maybe 8. And my Uncle Chris met her. My Uncle Chris met the whole family. And Colonel Parker, I had the pleasure of meeting him a few times. Very unpersonable. He didn't like talking to anybody. He was very quiet to himself. And if you got to monopolize or talk to Elvis, he took offense to that, because he didn't want new ideas being put into Elvis Presley's head.
Yeah, because he was like scamming money off him, right?
Well, at the end, they sued, Elvis Presley Enterprise sued Parker, and they got 50% back of whatever the Colonel took from them. And they said by today's standards, it's not even allowed in the industry to take 50%. A manager doesn't take that much
No,
from
no.
anybody. But Elvis didn't care.
That's right.
Elvis was the person that paid all his taxes and the government. And a lot of people don't realize that if you look at Elvis Presley or Jimmy Carter, who was your president of the United States, he was related to Jimmy Carter. He was like a 7th cousin removed, whatever that's called. But if you look it up, that's who he was. And when people say that, I don't know how to say it, and I don't want to say the wrong thing to see. People correct me saying I'm wrong. I don't know. When Elvis passed, we were sent down to the funeral. I was there for the funeral.
Who were you
But-
sitting with?
I was sitting, next to me was Farrah Fawcett and Lee Majors were there. And I remember Caroline Kennedy was in front, and they called her away somebody removed her from where she was sitting, and they escorted her out of the house and asked her to leave politely. She was working for Rolling Stone magazine, and she had a camera. I don't know what type of camera she had. It was something small that was hidden, and she was trying to take pictures. And somebody spotted her, and they asked her to leave. But when they said he passed, Jimmy Carter, Elvis was related, to him and Ed. And they said that if Elvis Presley was alive, then after the funeral there was speculation that he never died, and that, well, people that think this stuff, and they say things, how can you prove it? You don't really know. And that,
Hearsay is what it is.
I
right?
went down to the funeral. It looked like him laying there in the casket, but the casket was 3/4 of the way closed. And I remember he had a blue suit on and a white tie, but the hair never looked the same, because that's how he wore his hair in the 50s, all greased and slicked back. He never wore his hair like that in the 70s. And we were told after he was buried and everything, and that they claimed that Elvis never really died, and that we don't know. We didn't know ourselves in that, but I remember my uncle saying when he was alive, there's a lot more to his death than meets the eye. And he goes, Elvis had connections with the government left and right, and he did. He paid all his taxes, and he did things. One thing that people don't really know about Elvis is that when you go to Hawaii, where the Arizona went down in 1941 when it was bombed at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, we had 1,500 servicemen died in that ship. And the Navy was building a memorial to memorialize those people there, and they ran out of money. They couldn't finish it. Elvis did a concert out there, and he raised the money to finish the memorial. So when you go out to Hawaii and you go out to Honolulu in the bay, if you go on that, the boat tram takes you out there, it'll tell you that the memorial was finished by Elvis Presley. Danny Thomas, they built one of the world famous hospitals called the St. Jude Center in Memphis. They didn't have enough money to finish part of the hospital. Elvis Presley bought President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's yacht. I don't know how or why he bought it in that, but he got together with Danny Thomas, and he asked Danny Thomas, for whatever reason, they were talking about finishing the hospital wing or whatever. They didn't have money to finish. And Danny Thomas says, yeah, he goes, we're going to look for revenue because we don't have enough money to finish. Elvis says, I'll finish it. And he told Danny Thomas, I have a yacht that's over $1 million that I bought, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's yacht, presidential yacht. And Danny Thomas says, what am I going to do with the yacht? He goes, sell it.
Yeah.
And they sold it. And the money they got from that, they finished the hospital. Yeah, he was just
That's amazing.
He was just a giving person in that. And every time we would see him, he gave anything to anybody that wanted anything. And I remember several times that we were at the dinner table or that we were out with him, and people would come up and ask him for stuff. And I remember my aunt and uncle, I was with them once.
Remember the lady with the Cadillacs?
That was the black lady, yeah. We were at, he was at Macy
No wonder he doesn't stop
Cadillac.
talking. You keep giving him the subject. Ah, I love you.
He was what? Yeah, we were at,
He loves to hear all these stories, so he wants everybody to know them.
oh God. Well, he was at Macy Cadillac. And they were buying a car for his birthday. And I remember there were two Cadillacs. One was a white one was a blue one. I think they were Eldorados. And they were inside, and it was pouring rain outside. And there was a black lady waiting for a bus. And he saw the lady waiting out there, and they called the black lady in. And they asked her if she knew who he was, and she goes, well, sure, everybody knows him. That's Mr. Presley. And he called her over, and he asked her, he says, ma'am, he goes, I got a question to ask you. He goes, today is my birthday. And he goes, you see these two cars here? Which car do you think I'd look better in? And she goes, well, with your eyes, I think you'd look good in the blue car with the white. She said, I think that matches your eyes. And he goes, I really like the blue one or whatever and that. And then he says, I got another problem. And she goes, what can I help you with? I can't do you anything. He says, yeah. He goes, you can help me with. He goes, I got this car and I don't know what to do with it. She goes, how can I help you with it? He says, do you drive? She goes, no. She goes, I don't. She says, I take a bus to work. I'm just a cleaning lady. He goes, well, I'm going to give you this car. And she started bawling her eyes and fell to her knees. And we turned around. And I says, I can't believe it. He's doing something like that. And that made the newspapers, and that made TV and everything. And that's how that guy from, that newscaster guy that was, I think, in Colorado, that's how he turned around and heard that story. He goes, Elvis, if you're giving out cars, I got a car they had shot. And I guess a day or 2 or 3 days later, they sent him a car, or, they paid for a car for him to pick up. And that, all these stories you hear about him, and that, it's all true, man. I don't know. When people ask me about drugs, I don't know. And that, did I see bottles and all that there? I saw a few, but who knows? George Nicolopoulos, we knew him. He was Elvis's physician, and he came in. I remember Elvis had a sore throat. He was spraying this stuff down his throat. I remember when he was in the hospital at Baptist Humana Hospital. We went up there to see him, and his nurse turned out to be a real good friend of ours, Marion Cox. She's in her 90s, and I always stayed friends with Marion, and I would always get a Christmas card from her and stuff like that. She used to call Elvis her baby, and she wrote a book on him that I called him Babe, and she sent me an autographed copy of it, and I would reminisce. She would tell me stories about him and stuff like that. I mean, I didn't see a lot or do the stuff when I was with him, or my family was with him, or whatever, that, no matter where we were, and that he treated us special, and he was nice to us. And he gave me a lot of stuff. I got a belt buckle, I got the part of the price, patches, I got a ring. My mom, before my mom died, my mom had a TLC necklace for her and my sister. I got a TCB necklace. And that the Entourage wore. I still have mine. He gave me a guitar, and all the stuff I have are special to me that I would never sell. And people have offered me so much money for my stuff. And my wife tells me, I want you to sell everything. And I said, no, I'm not selling anything. When I die, I don't care what you do with it. And but this was stuff that he gave to me, and it was sacred to me. And I was just glad to have him as a friend. Do I consider him a megastar? I never considered him a megastar. Never. I just considered him as a friend, a real good friend. And he made you feel comfortable when you were with him. I never once heard him talk nasty about anybody. And there were many people that talked nasty about him. And he would turn around and he would just walk away from them. And he said, you can't change anybody and how they are. And he says, don't believe all the tabloids that you read. He said, because a lot of that's trash in there. We became good friends with Anne Margaret, very good friends with Anne Margaret. And Anne Margaret, she turned around, she said, they've offered me millions of dollars for me to tell stories about when Elvis and I were together and stuff like that. And she goes, it's nobody's business but ours. And I gave her a lot of credit. Gave her a lot of credit in that. And I met Anne Margaret about 30 years after. And I was talking to her, my wife and I met her. And we were talking to her and that. And she recalled the good times, and she goes, I remember you when you were a small little fat kid. You used to guard my dressing room. I used to sit in a chair out there and guard her dressing room. Yeah, that was funny. There were good times we had. Like I said, that was my 15 minutes of fame. There's a lot of stuff he did I don't know. I'm only telling you some of the experiences that I had. But
Tell me about the basement, and you got invited to come to the house and listen to him jam.
well, that was the Jungle Room. Elvis wouldn't go to any more of the recording sessions for whatever reason, so RCA brought a portable studio down there, and he would jam down there. He would jam down in the basement, and then some of the times when he was going to Nashville, I had a little cassette recorder, and I recorded some of the outtakes. They were warming up their equipment and they were playing around. And I went to, I had my recorder on, and it was Red West came up and he grabbed the recorder from me. And he says, you can't tape any of this stuff. RCA doesn't allow it. And Elvis saw that and he come out come out of the booth that he was in, and he grabbed the recorder and he said, "You give that back to him." I told him he can tape anything he wants, because you can't do that. He goes, "I don't care what he can do," and I said he can have it, and that was the end of it. And I ended up, I still have the tapes, and that I was told now that you can't sell any of them or do anything, which I never did, because that's infringement. Elvis Presley Enterprise owns everything, and you can't do that. This was my personal stuff that I was just a young kid, and I still have the tapes, and I still have the outtakes where they were clowning around and singing and all that. And like I said, he was just a man. He was just a man. A lot of people said Elvis never smoked. I said that's a lie. I seen him smoke cigarettes, or not cigarettes. They were called Erics. He used to smoke the cherry brand. I used to see him do that, and they said Elvis reads the Bible every night. And I said, yeah, he read the Bible pretty much, because he would tell us passages from it. I said, I seen Elvis look at different magazines and stuff like that you considered risque or whatever. And he was just a man. Colonel tried to implant that image into him. That's what made the mystique. But I think what made him more famous than anything was that you didn't hear that much about Elvis, and that the Colonel kept him out of the limelight as much as he could. And that made people even more interested in him, because there was the mystique that you were hearing, or you were hearing stories about his generosity, or you were hearing stories about his good nature, or you were hearing stories he was with a woman that, somebody else, or a starlet or whatever, and that the Colonel never flaunted him to anybody, and that made people even want him more. And I remember him saying, "I'm only an image. When I get up there on stage, it's like I'm putting the Superman costume on. I got to put the cape and costume on, and I'm Elvis Presley for an hour and a half, 2 hours on stage. And when I'm off, I don't want to be bothered with it. I'm just a man."
Yeah.
And that was his philosophy. He never flaunted his stardom to anybody that I ever saw. And never made anybody feel that he was above you. When you met him and talked to him, it's like you were meeting a guy on the street talking. He was just a humble guy. Just a humble guy in that. But I never once ever saw him treat a fan nasty. He never refused a person for an autograph. He would stop dead in his tracks and make sure he gave you an autograph. And I remember, I don't remember who it was that said something to him. And he goes, "I'll never forget my fans. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be what I am today." And you don't see any movie star do that.
No.
Never, 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 never. And I remember a story about him to a serviceman that was in 1971. Elvis and Jerry Schilling went to the White House to visit Nixon. And when they were on an American airline, and I remember that the story I was told, there was a serviceman that Elvis saw sitting, and he was coming back from Nam to visit his family or whatever. And Elvis went to one of his I think he went to Jerry Schilling, and he said, "Find out if that serviceman's got any money on him." And he said he only had a few dollars. And he told Jerry, he goes, "Give him whatever you have in your wallet or whatever." He said, "Give that guy. He's a serviceman fighting for our freedom." And they helped that serviceman out. And that touched me very much, because never thinking years later I'd be drafted during the Vietnam War and I'd have to go into the service. And I remember that kindness that he showed, or that I heard that he showed to that serviceman. And he met President Nixon. He met him, and he met Nixon's daughter, Pat. And I remember the story that I was told that she told her father, and that, "Dad, if Elvis does want to come to the White House," she says, "please get him to come here. I want to meet him." And they sent a letter back to the hotel that he was staying at and told him to come visit. And Elvis went to the White House with Jerry Schilling, and they met Nixon. And Elvis wanted a badge. He wanted a regular badge of the DEA. And I think Finley was the man that ran the DEA. I think Finley told him no, he'd give him an honorary badge. And Elvis told him, "I don't want an honorary badge, I want a real one." And he says, "I can't do it for you." So when Elvis went to the White House, he went to President Nixon, and Nixon said, "Elvis, whatever I could do for you, I'll do." He goes, "I want a real badge from the DEA. And he goes, "You got to be kidding." He goes, "No." He goes, "If you want to do anything for me, that's what I want."
Yeah.
And Nixon went to his press secretary and said, get a hold of whoever that's in the DEA, Finley or whoever. I want a badge delivered here. And they delivered a badge to Elvis Presley. And he got a real DEA badge. When you go to Washington and you go to the DEA and you walk in, they show all the agents that ever became an agent. Elvis Presley's picture is on there. It's up there in Washington. And he became one. I don't know what he really did with it. I heard all stories. And I don't know. I don't like to say a lot of the stuff because I don't know if it's true. I have no idea. And that, but a lot of people said he misused his badge. I don't know. People, like I say, people say trash left and right. And you read this stuff in the magazines or the books they write about him. I remember reading in one of the books that at the end he was so out of it that he would pee himself and poop himself in a diaper and they had to change his diaper. I read that and I said, I don't know. That's hard for me to even fathom anything like that. I don't know. But this is stuff that you read, so you just gotta,
It's trash mostly.
well, yeah, I imagine a lot of it is. In that, I just remember the good times we shared with him.
Yeah.
And he was generous to my family like you wouldn't believe in that. And he was just a good friend. He was a very, very good friend. That I'll never forget him as long as I live. And when I say my prayers or I go to church and that, and I light candles, I always light a candle for him. And that, and I hope someday, maybe if I pass and that, I meet him again just to say hi to him. And that, like I said, I didn't know him where I saw him every day. No, I didn't. So I don't know what he did on the days that he was in California or he was traveling. We went to Pontiac Stadium with him on New Year's Eve to watch him. And that New Year's, I think it was '74, and that was a great time. My sister and I, geez, we had a blast with him. It was so funny. And I remember once being there for 4th of July at Graceland, and they were doing fireworks. They would dress up. They put like baseball or football. They had like knee pads and gloves and padding, and they would take these not bottle rockets, but they were like I don't know what they would call them. They stick them in the ground and they shoot flares up.
Yeah.
And they would light that and they would shoot at one another.
Oh my God.
I used to see the guys running and the guys, his entourage, they'd get hit in the face or the side and they'd be screaming, or one of the flares would go down their shirt and they'd be running and screaming. And I was just a small kid, but I remember watching them do that. I thought, holy smokes. He enjoyed life. He just enjoyed life. And I remember I met, what's his name? He played in Baba Black Sheep. Robert Conrad. I remember Robert Conrad, strikingly handsome, and he was friends with Elvis Presley and Lee Majors. They would play football when they'd go. Lee Majors' brother, I think he was he ran the University of Memphis. He was some type of manager, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but he did something with the football, or he did something with the University of Memphis. And they would all get together on the weekend and they'd play touch football. And I remember seeing them once. I was out there watching them play touch football, and Elvis was running. And I remember Elvis getting tackled and that, and everybody was, laughing at that because they tackled Elvis. They brought him down. And I remember when he hit the dirt, it was raining. He hit the dirt, and Elvis got up, and his face, he looked like blackface. And that, he had all mud on him and all that stuff. Yeah, I remember seeing that stuff.
Tell me about the Grecian story again.
Oh, the Grecian formula?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the...
Hair dye.
Yeah, the hair dye in that. Yeah, they used to dye his hair. Larry Geller would come from Los Angeles. He'd fly in, or Elvis would send for him and that. And I remember seeing Elvis when I was at the house. He got up for breakfast. He was drinking coffee. And he sat there, and his hair was all over the place. And I remember seeing about that much, where the roots are, it was white. And I never said nothing. I just looked at him and that, and then my sister turned around and she said, Elvis is prematurely white. I guess everybody in his family turned white at an early age, but he had like blonde hair. And he wanted his hair dyed black because he thought that would show up more in the films or on TV or whatever that. So I remember that we had to go get him Clairol. I think it was called Clairol. Number 1. Could be wrong with the number of that, but I remember we had to go get him Clairol. And Larry Geller would put the rubber gloves on, and they'd be massaging it in his hair, and then they'd be hosing it out. She had pulling his hair became black. And the black looked great on him, and I mean, he was stunning. And then when he would comb his hair, I remember once he was coming down from the bedroom. He was coming down in the parlor, and we were sitting on the couch, and everybody was talking. And I remember he had black slacks on, and he wore a red flannel. It was like a fleece top. My mouth dropped open. And I'm not saying because I'm a guy, I'm not gay or anything like that, but this dude was handsome. This dude was handsome. And I remember the girls looking over, and they couldn't keep their eyes off him. But I'll tell you, when God made him, he broke the mold, because I never seen anybody that was flawless like him. And he came down and he was showing everybody that he had a new outfit on and that, you know, of course the girls were all going crazy, and I'm sitting there going, damn, he makes anything look good. And I seen him at his worst. I seen him have a sweatshirt on, and he had slacks on, and I said, we were in jeans. I said, Elvis, I said, why don't you put a pair of jeans on and get comfortable? He goes, I hate blue jeans. And I said, you do? He says, yeah. He goes, as a young kid, that's all I had to wear. And he goes, I'll never wear blue jeans again. And no matter what trash he put on, he looked good. He just looked good. But he always had rings, and he had, he used to wear a lot of tops that were unbuttoned. He used to have his, I remember one day he had a cross and a Star of David on. And I had to ask him, I said, why do you have the Star of David on? Are you Jewish? He says, no. He goes, I don't want to miss heaven on a technicality. And he told me that. And who got him to wear the Star of David was a singer named Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy was a black singer in Vegas. He was one of the Rat Pack. He was one of the Rat Pack. There was Joey Bishop, Shirley MacLaine was in the Rat Pack.
Sinatra.
Dean Martin.
Dean Martin, yep.
And Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra. And they loved Sammy Davis in the hotels, but they would never let him walk in the front door. He had to go in the back room, and when he got done singing, he had to leave in the back door. They would never let him in the casinos to eat with the white people. Frank Sinatra found that out, and Frank Sinatra says, you do that again, I'm pulling out, you lose me. And he was the #1 draw at the time in Vegas, was Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin too, and that. And he said, Sammy Davis Jr. walks in the same door I do, or we don't come here anymore. And Elvis took a real liking to Sammy Davis. And Sammy was in a bad car accident where he lost one of his eyes. And I guess Elvis helped him with his bills, his medical bills and everything else. And Sammy never forgot Elvis. And Sammy Davis gave him a Star of David. And I think Elvis gave him a watch or a ring or something like that. And they were just close friends. They were all close friends in that. I remember Elvis's daughter, Nancy Sinatra. She played in one of the movies with him. And she liked Elvis.
Not Elvis's daughter.
Huh?
Frank's daughter.
Frank's daughter.
Yeah. Or I'm saying Elvis's daughter. I'm sorry, Frank Sinatra's daughter, Nancy Sinatra, and they were close friends. And Nancy Sinatra, I remember her. She had long blonde hair, and she made a song called "These Boots Are Made for Walking." And she used to come visit him at the hotel. I remember one night we were watching. We had tickets, and we went to see Tom Jones. And Elvis Presley walked in. And Tom Jones stopped his singing. He introduced Elvis Presley. And I think he asked Elvis to go to the stage or whatever. And he said no. When he came in, he just wanted to sit and hear the entertainment and that. He didn't want to be recognized in that. His time on the stage was an hour and a half, 2 hours. He didn't want to upstage anybody. And it's a shame because he was so popular, he really couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. And I remember, which was the Black Tom. What was that singer's name? He was with Billie Holiday, the black singer. Oh my God, I can't.
Ella Fitzgerald?
No, he was a male singer. He slicked his hair back. He was with him when Billie Holiday died.
Big Papa?
No, he was a black. Oh my God.
Buddy Holly, Richie Valens.
Hang on a minute. I got. Who was the black singer during the 50s that was with Billie Holly? Who was the famous black singer during the 50s that was with Billie Holly?
Nat King Cole?
No. You figure since there's no signal.
No Fats Domino.
No. I'll think about it in a second. But Elvis used to go see him in Vegas. And he used to say, and then I asked Elvis one day, I asked him, I said, who's your favorite singer that you think was one of the best that you liked? And he said, my favorite, he liked,
Tom Jones.
no, it wasn't. Roy Orbison was my favorite. And I asked him, who's your favorite Canadian? Because I love the guest list. And he told me Anne Murray. Anne Murray was one of his favorites.
Oh, really?
Anne Murray, I know that he had her albums, because I seen the albums in the house. He had Anne Murray albums, and she sang some song called Snowbird or something like that. And he used to play that, because I heard that in the house. And he told me Anne Murray, he said her voice is like an angel from heaven. He goes, I just think she's fantastic. And he became friends with her. I didn't know anything about Anne Murray, and I never met Roy Orbison and that, but he loved Roy Orbison, because I saw records in the house of Roy Orbison. And Tom Jones, he became friends with Tom Jones. When Tom Jones was singing, he'd go see him. When Elvis was on stage, Tom Jones came in to see him. And I met Tom Jones several times. And I liked him as a singer, but I didn't like him as a
Personality?
person. Nah, you could tell he was very phony, and he liked young girls. And when he came to Buffalo, I went to the Executive Hotel because my sister wanted to see him. They allowed my sister in, they wouldn't allow me in. He wanted just young girls in his room. Now, by today's standards, you'd be arrested.
Yep.
I heard stories, I don't know if they're true, and I won't mention of what I think of that, but I never liked him as a man, but I liked his music. And they wrote a book on him, and you can Google it, and you can even read it on your phone. When Linda died, that was his wife, he married her when he was 17 until the day she died, and he was living in California when she died. And he said that he claimed he was with over like 1,500 women that he went through.
That's gross.
And his wife knew that, but the wife never cared, because the wife,
Like the money?
I don't know if that's true, that I don't know. I just know that she had cancer when she died. But Tom Jones turned around and said his only love in his life he ever had was his wife. And when she died, I guess that broke him apart terrible. And several years ago, Tom and I went to Rama, and I was told Priscilla was up there with Tom Jones. And I went to see her, but it never transpired again. She didn't want to talk to anybody, but she was with Tom Jones. And I heard she was dating him. So I called a friend of mine in Memphis and asked if that was true. And they said, yes, it was. They were dating each other. And that Priscilla Presley, when I remembered her, she was young, she was beautiful. Look at her now, what happened to her with her face. All the millions of dollars that she had reconstructive surgery, plastic surgery, and something didn't take right with her. And it ruined the nerves in her face or something. And to look at her now, the beauty I see is gone. But you gotta remember, we're all getting older.
Isn't she dead now?
No, Priscilla's still alive.
Priscilla Presley?
Yeah.
No, she died a couple of years ago.
No, Lisa died.
Oh,
Lisa
Oh, yeah,
died.
yeah, that's right.
Lisa died.
did
Priscilla's
die.
alive.
sorry.
Yes. Priscilla's still alive. Yeah, she doesn't look right anymore.
She had some type of reconstructive plastic surgery that went wrong. I imagine you could Google it and see. People ask me, I says, I don't know. You ask me questions. I can't answer you all these questions because I don't know. I wasn't there. I only know the times that we were there. And when we were there, they were just gifted times. They were gifted times. Yeah, we had a great time.
Take me back when you were in his house for the funeral. What did you see personally? What's your opinion?
Well, we were in the music room. That's called the Peacock Room now, and they had the casket there. I remember somebody saying, do you really think he's dead? And I don't know who said it. There was somebody talking. And he said, there's a noise coming from the casket. Well, I remember when we landed in Memphis, I remember at the airport, there was
Thermometer?
No, yeah, there was a sign, and it said 103 degrees when we landed. And you got to remember, down south, it's not like 103 up here. It's humid down there because I remember getting off the plane. It was like stepping into hell.
Yeah.
And you're inside the house, and they had portable air conditioners everywhere. I was told there was a portable air conditioner behind the gasket. Now, somebody made a comment, and I don't know who it was, and they said that's not really him. That is a eulogy that's in there. It's a wax eulogy. Now, a body doesn't sweat when it's dead. And I remember people saying that there were beads of sweat on this face. And they're saying that was a wax eulogy. I don't know. To me, the only thing I thought that was different was that the hair was different because he never cut his hair short and slicked it back like that, like he did in the 50s. There was a movie called It Happened at the World's Fair. And that's exactly how the hair was in the casket. He never wore his hair like that. His hair was longer. And I remember that they stopped the viewing and they brought the morticians that were there. And they said that his sideburns were coming loose due to the heat. They had to glue them back on. I don't know. I can't tell you. I honestly don't know. I always thought he died. And now you're finding out all this different stuff. And there was a doctor. His name is Dr. Hinton, Hinton. And he wrote a limited book, and I got a book from him that he sent. And he said Elvis never died. He said he treated Elvis. And he said that was a lie, that what happened and that. He said Elvis's health was failing, and he had to get him out, or he would have died. There's speculation that I heard over the years. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I honestly don't know. They said there was actually a helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, was sent to pick him up on the day that he died, that they said he died. And they said that there's another theory that it's in the books, and it's, you can Google it. I don't remember the man's name, but there was a lady who said it was her husband. She said that her husband was dying of cancer. He had the same build. He looked a little bit similar like Elvis Presley. They said that he was dying. They claim that's who's in the casket that they buried. It was never Elvis. I don't know if that's true or not. That's in some of the books that have been written in that. She went on national TV and she said, yes, it is. And she said she has nothing to lie about because she's sick herself. She's in her 80s. She claims that's her husband. She goes, I'm not going to lie anymore. It's true. I remember, Tom, when we were up, when I talked to Charlie Hodge that night on the phone. I was talking to Charlie Hodge, and Charlie said there's more going on with this death than even I know. And Charlie Hodge was one of the Memphis Mafia. He was close to Elvis. He lived at Graceland for a while. Charlie Hodge said even he didn't know what was going on. So a lot of the stories that are coming out, I imagine maybe there's some truth. I don't know. I always thought he died and that, but a lot of stuff doesn't ring. If you're dead, you can't claim an insurance policy. There was never an insurance policy cashed when Elvis died. So that's the only thing that I would question. And when Dr. Hinton, when he came out, he had personal stuff that Elvis had, personal jewelry. It's not nothing that you see when you go to Memphis, Tennessee, at his house in the museum. This was personal stuff that Elvis had on him all the time. Hinton claimed Elvis gave him all that. He had written stuff on Elvis Presley that Elvis signed and would write. He had pictures and he had videos of Elvis, and I know that Elvis Enterprise tried to discredit him, and I know that they tried and they couldn't do it.
Didn't the FBI try?
Yes, they brought everybody in to discredit him, and they couldn't do it. Elvis Enterprise, they say they make no comment on it. I don't know if it's because they're saying it's a lie. I don't know.
But
No
didn't they
idea.
lose the lawsuit against him?
Yeah, they had a big lawsuit against him, and they pulled his license, and they couldn't do anything with him. And Dr. Hinton still has the stuff. And what I'm telling you is only what I know. Go online and judge it for yourself.
And they had to give the license back to him when he won the...
Yeah, he got his license back. Yeah, got his license back. And I always said, son of a gun, if he's alive, good for him. And I remember people saying that he lived in a fishbowl existence. And I remember my sister asked him one time, do you live in a fishbowl existence? He says, hell no. He goes, I do whatever I want to do. He said, you can't believe those tabloids. He lived how he wanted to live. And that he was an external person. He slept during the day and did things during the nighttime. And that I was young. I couldn't do that. I could never, go out with them all the time. When we would see them,
Was,
we would have a good time with them. But at nighttime, he went out with his friends and they partied all night.
was he a good piano player?
He was a very good piano player.
What songs did he like?
Old Rugged Cross was one of his favorite.
You mean gospel songs?
Yeah, I remember him saying "How Great Thou Art." I watched him singing that at the piano one night, and they had I don't know what they call the lights that are embedded into the ceiling, pan lights or whatever they call them. And I remember they had the light going down on the piano, and he sat there one night and he started playing the piano. And I remember he looked up at the ceiling, and you could tell he was transfixed. He wasn't looking at anybody; he was looking at the ceiling. And my mother, I remember my mom saying, "He's singing to God, and he must be looking at his mother." And the way he sang, well, see, now I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. But I remember just being a young kid, listening to that song, and you felt transfixed yourself, like he was talking to God. And he always talked great about God. Never heard him cuss to the point where we would hear him say anything in that. And never heard him talk bad about anybody. If he didn't like you, he would never bother with you. He'd leave you alone, and that he'd walk away. But I never saw him treat anybody nasty or do anything in that. I never saw it. And I was friends with a lot of people down in Memphis, and they said the same thing. And that, he was never like that. He never forgot his beginnings, where he came from, and that's how he was. In that, And I imagine if there was other stuff that he did too, more power to him. He was a human being. And that, just because I didn't see it didn't mean it didn't happen. But I don't like when people will just print stuff, the negative part, because they want to sell magazines or talk trash or bullshit or this or that. And that, I don't know what the reason is why they want to do it. I just know that I had good times with him when he was alive, when I would see him. And I didn't do it that much. I was just lucky to be there at the right time with either my aunt and my uncle and that, and then my family, my mom, or my sister and myself would go down, and we were available and that. And they were just really, really good times. But he was crazy. He was crazy. He would play games and laugh and joke. And I remember a story. I wasn't involved, but I remember a story that he had a Ford Pantera. And if I recall correctly, I remember seeing the car. It was yellow, and it was behind the International. And he drove the car in there, and this car was made by Ford. And it was a very limited edition sport car. And I remember he couldn't get it started. And he got out of the car and he pulled a gun out of his pants pocket and he shot the gun. Shot the car to death. And he left the car, and there he goes, good, I got this motherfucker out of its misery. And he shot the car. And the car laid there in the back of the hotel for, I think it was days or a week or whatever. And my cousin and I, we had an opportunity to go down there. And I remember seeing the car, never thinking nobody wanted the car. We could have got the car and kept it, but somebody got the car, and the last I heard, it's up in Reno in some museum, and it still has all the bullet holes in it. And that car is worth over probably $1 million or $2 million because it belonged to Elvis Presley. And I remember we could have had the car. We could have had the car for free. And they told Elvis, what do you want done with the car? He goes, I don't care. Get rid of the son of a bitch. He didn't. He was just crazy. He was crazy like that and that. But everybody in law enforcement in Vegas, they idolized him. He could do no wrong. He could do anything, even in Memphis and that. If anybody got in trouble for something like that, Elvis made a call, they took care of it. And Elvis was a member of the Memphis Police Department. They gave him an honorary, the sheriff stood there. And yeah, he knew everybody down there and that. And guns were his favorite. I remember going in the house sitting from the dining room to the living room to the kitchen. There were handguns on tables. And I would look and I said, man, are those real? I would say to myself, are they real? I never touched them. I just looked at them. And Elvis had guns everywhere in the house. But he enjoyed guns. And I remember I used to hear them fire them in the backyard sometimes. And that, and him and his crew, the Memphis Mafia. And I'd see the Memphis Mafia come in all the time. And then if they got to know you, they were decent guys and that, but they were wild. They were just a young kid, so I mean, I wasn't with their clique or nothing like that, but they were just wild. They were wild hooligans and that, and that you'd laugh.
You said that a lot of people said that he never swore
He swore.
and he never smoked.
Yeah, he smoked.
Yep.
Yeah, he smoked these little cigarette there.
Old Port?
Huh?
Was it Old Port?
No.
Cherries?
If I recall, I might have the name wrong, but I think they were called Eric. They were cigarettes, and he used to like cherry.
Yeah.
And that he used to smoke those. I used to see him smoke those.
With
That's
little
how I
chips
know.
on them.
And when he would swear, yeah, I'd hear him say some words and stuff like that. Like I said, people would say, "Oh, the Colonel made that persona that he walked on water with Jesus." Oh, he was never that way. He was never that way. In the beginning, you got to remember, back in the 50s, in the beginning of that, when he was gyrating on stage, people didn't want their daughters seeing that. Oh, he's getting my daughter all ideas in her head. And if you said horny, you'd go to jail because you couldn't talk that way back then.
Yeah, they didn't even like him dancing, did
No,
they?
because they thought it was provocative, and they thought that you didn't do that. You did that in the bedroom with your wife, and that, and so the Colonel made that persona up. I'm going to make him out to be a clean-cut guy, and you got to remember, in the beginning, he always had a shirt and tie on, and he had the clean-cut image, and that's what sold. And then when he went on Ed Sullivan, he was gyrating, and the people wrote in to CBS or whatever it was at the time, screaming about it. Gyrating his hips, and we know what he's doing, and these girls are getting all wet, and they're getting all crazy.
Yeah.
And then when he had to go back on, they had to fill him from the waist up, and that's when Ed Sullivan turned around and said, Ed Sullivan didn't like him the first time. He goes, "Oh my God, I'm going to be sued. I'm going to be sued what he's doing," and that. Well, that was the music going through him. And Ed Sullivan he said, "I don't want this son of a bitch on my show ever again," and that. Well, the demand was so popular for him being on there that Sullivan had to bring him back on. And when he brought him back on and he got to talk to him and that, he went on and he said, "Listen, all these rumors of all this stuff you're hearing about him isn't true. He's a decent, clean-cut guy." And Elvis knew his place. He always said sir and ma'am to everybody and that. That's how he was raised.
Yeah.
That's how he was raised in that. And his mother meant a lot to him. His mother meant a lot to him. I remember once I had asked him, I talked to him about my grandmother. And when my gram died, I had made a comment to him that I had missed my grandmother real bad. And I said, "I imagine you miss your mother that way." And I was kicked by one of his entourage, kicked me and had to keep my mouth shut, not to bring his mother up. And he turned around and he saw it. He goes, "Leave him alone." And he goes, "Yeah, well, I'll answer your question." He said, "You loved your grandmother. She raised you like your mom, right?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I loved my mom too." And he goes, "You could ask me anything about my mom." And he never talked about his mom to anybody, but I was a young kid, and he saw that I wasn't a threat, or I was innocent maybe to him or something, I don't know. But I told him, I said, "Yeah, I miss her immensely." And he took the time to address that. And he told me, he goes, "We're all going to be there. We're all going to be there. Just a matter of time for all of us."
Yeah.
He said, "None of us escaped." And that, he goes, "No matter how famous we are or what money or this or that." And he goes, "My money means nothing to me. It's just a way of helping people." And that's how he was. He didn't care. He said, "I'll probably die broke." He goes, "I don't care. I'll go back driving truck again." He was always thinking of other people. That's what I always thought about him, and that's what I always saw about him, and that he was decent to people, and he never forgot where he came from. And I'll take that to my deathbed.
What was he like as a father and a husband?
I don't know anything with Priscilla, with what he did in that. Priscilla and them, they were finished. I met Priscilla several times in that. She was very cold and coy. I don't know if that's because they were finished or whatever in that. Linda Thompson is who I knew very well.
His girlfriend.
Yeah, Linda Thompson I knew very well. and a very good friend of our family's, Lucy DeBarbin. She was a dancer, and she dated Elvis. And my mom knew Lisa extremely well, and my aunt. And she became pregnant. She told us she had Elvis's, her daughter is called Desiree, and her birth certificate says Desiree Presley. Desiree came to Buffalo, and I met Desiree, and she looks 100% like Elvis Presley, but as a woman. And the Memphis entourage turned around and said that was true. I was drawn struck by it because they denied everything. Did Elvis have other kids? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. We heard that over the years. He was a man. He had wants and desires, and that there's a lot of people come forth and say that Elvis had children with him. I don't know if it's true, but I know they did a blood test and a DNA with Lucy DeBarbin's daughter, Desiree. It was a 100% match. They never claimed anything from the estate. They never asked for any money. And Lucy DeBarbin and that. What Desiree's doing today, I don't know. I never knew Desiree. I only met her when she came to Buffalo. But I remember her mother as being a dancer. And I remember when she was pregnant, that she was my aunt's girlfriend. That she was one of the big dancers at the hotels.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley, they claim he had a son. You can go online, and sometimes online they'll say, yeah, there's numerous kids that claim that. There's ladies that came forward saying they were pregnant. I don't know if it was true. Some said it wasn't. They couldn't prove anything. But the people that came forward said that they would take DNA tests to prove, and I heard that a lot. There's 2, 3, 4 of them that came true saying that they are DNA positive. And that who knows? And that, I don't know what the reason is. That are they trying to get money? I don't know. I have no idea.
I wonder if any of them have the same vocal talent as he does. He did.
Desiree's a singer.
Yeah?
She is a singer.
Mm-hmm. How old would she be now?
Desiree, I'd have to look it up. I don't know. I couldn't even begin to tell you. How old is Desiree Presley? Here, there's a thing on Desiree Presley. Desiree, I imagine she'd probably be in her 40s or 50s now. Or maybe 60s, I don't know. I only met her once when she came to Buffalo, and her mother was with her, and I went backstage and talked to her mother.
Oh, she does look like him.
Yep.
Same eyes, same facial expression.
Lucy DeBarbin was a beautiful person. She was very true. She never wanted money or anything. She wanted to be with him.
Yeah.
I'm dying.
Let's see. How is she? I'm looking for an age here. There's nothing right now. I can't find it.
Doesn't it say?
No.
I'd probably see she's probably maybe in her 50s or older. But I remember seeing her, how she was beautiful, but she looks like him. Eyes, nose, everything.
Yeah. Yeah, she looks like him.
And Lucy DeBarbin and had the birth certificate and had, they never contested it. Nobody did anything in that. Why?
Okay, so she was born in August 1958, 10 days after Elvis's mother, Gladys, died.
Wow. You see that? I didn't know.
I wonder if she came back reincarnated.
Who knows?
Lucy gave birth to Desiree Romaine Presley. Elvis was unaware of Desiree's birth and was about to be shipped to Germany for service in the United States Army that October.
So she'd be 67.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, but they look identical. Identical.
And Lucy dated Elvis for a while because my Uncle Chris used to tell me that they made a strikingly couple. And Lucy DeBarber was gorgeous when she was young. Oh, she was very, very
I did not
gorgeous.
hurt you. I just spooked you. You're okay. Go
You're
back
okay,
to
bud.
sleep.
Here.
Just the sound
Here,
of the
yeah.
thing moving.
But he didn't
Where's my
acknowledge her, I guess.
Huh?
She didn't. He didn't acknowledge her as his daughter.
I don't.
You're not sure about that one?
I was told through my aunt and through my mom that Elvis wanted to take care of her. He wanted to pay for the pregnancy, and whatever it did. And he, now it's only speculation. I do believe it's true, but I can't prove anything. I don't know. Lucy told him that she was pregnant, but she would never do anything against him. And I guess Elvis, from what I heard, was scared that if that would have came out, it would have ruined him. Because back in the 50s,
It's taboo.
that was taboo, and that.
He had to have
and
sex
Lucy
before
told him
marriage.
he had nothing to worry about. She would never do that to him. And I heard that Elvis knew that Desiree was his daughter, and that. But Lucy never put any claims on it. And do I believe that's true? Yes, I believe that's true. Is it true? I believe it is.
Yeah.
But I can't say I don't. But do I believe wholeheartedly, 100%, Desiree's his daughter? 100%.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
100%. And in the industry out in California, you talk to the people that worked with Elvis, from technicians to makeup artists to costumes to best boys to everybody that worked with him on sets, and even movie stars or people that were in his movies and that. They all knew the true stuff that went on there, but nobody would talk about it. Why should they?
Yeah.
And that if you said something about somebody that wasn't true or that would harm them, you'd be washed in the industry. They'd never have you back there. So people were really careful with what they said and did
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But Susan Henley, she was a blonde. Never met her, but in '68 he did. It wasn't a comeback special. It was.
Was it Christmas?
No, it was.
No.
He was in a bordello singing to a bunch of people, and Susan Henley was a blonde actress. She used to date James Caan. And Susan Henley was stunning, and I mean stunning. I never met her, but I saw her, and I couldn't keep my eyes off her. And she had the hots for Elvis. And she was just stunning with him and that. And they said that she really wanted to be with him. And I remember one of the guys, he asked him to go, Susan's here. He goes, oh, the love of my life. And I remember talking very nice about her. And I saw pictures of her now, what she looks like now, and she's very old. I figure she's in her 70s.
Yeah.
And we all want that Elvis to be back how he was.
Yeah, the young version.
Yeah, the young version and that.
The youth that never
Yeah.
disappears. It's always there.
Well,
right?
that's why I said, if this is true, that they faked his death for him to get out, then they did that for a reason. They wanted that persona to last forever. He was the rebel hillbilly that everybody, all the guys wanted to be like, all the girls wanted to be with, and that they wanted that image to stay. And when Dr. Hinton came out with this book, he turned around and said he was a very sick man. He had twisted colon, he had glaucoma real bad in his eyes. The stuff you used to hear about him going back to Memphis, Tennessee at the Baptist Humana Hospital. He'd be up in the hospital room up there, and you could always tell when he was in the hospital because they would put aluminum foil over the windows.
Oh, wow.
He didn't like light going in the room. And they said that he was there for detox all the time. And you got to remember, they didn't have the Betty Ford clinic where you could go. And that, I don't care what drugs he was on. They said he never took illicit drugs and that. Well, he did take drugs, and if that made him sick and that, well, because Dr. Nicolopoulos gave it to him and that, but then they tried to wean him off with placebos. I don't know. People ask me that all the time. I says, I don't know. Ask them. I can't ask you anything. I don't know. I didn't go up there and see him if he was in detox or whatever. And that. But I said, why do you want to trash somebody and that, to sell a magazine but I know he was a sick guy. I used to hear him cough all the time in the house. Sometimes I see him coughing, and he'd sit. And I remember one time he got real sick, and he left the table. He went in the bathroom. You could hear him belching. And I don't know what was really wrong with him. I was told, I know he had glaucoma, because he said the flashlights would bother his eyes all the time. He'd go in for needles and stuff like that. And this is stuff that we heard. But we never asked him anything. We just assumed that, that was all private for him. I felt bad, and it gave a lot. And you got to remember, you burn yourself out. If he was a mega star like he was, how many years was he on the planet that he was singing? He started in 54 and ended in 77. So what the 54, 74? So he was like 23 to 25 years figure top singing. He burned himself out. But everything he burned himself out, he gave to people, and that's how people should remember him a little bit. I remember his music, I remember his face, and I remember his kindness, and that I'll always remember. And do I miss him? Yeah, I miss him a lot. There's not a day goes by that I don't listen and I think, I remember our governor of New York State. He asked my mom, and he was talking to my family, and he was asking them, he goes, he wanted to go out to Vegas and see Elvis Presley, and my mom's brother and that hooked him up with tickets to go see him, and they wanted to see some floor shows at the Tropicana and at, I think it was the Sands. I think the Rat Pack were playing at the Sands, if I recall, and his name was Hugh Carey, was the governor, and I said, Governor, how would I go about getting special license plates for my car? And he goes, what? He said, do you want a special plate for your car? And I said, yeah. He said, tell me what you want. And I said, I want something with Elvis's name on it. And so I looked up, I said, can I get TCB Elvis? And he said, no, that's already taken. And I remember Elvis saying that we could always come down and see him. We could always come in and say hi to him anytime we were around. I said, can I get hi Elvis? And he goes, yeah. He goes, you can get that plate. That's not taken. And I still have that plate. I got the plates in 72, and I still got it. And I gave one of the plates to Graceland. And I still have the plate on my car now. And I get stopped by everybody. When I met Tom, now I don't know what year it was. I don't remember anymore. It was probably in the late 70s or early 80s. Cher was getting divorced from Greg Allman. And Cher was living in Buffalo, New York, in a place called Orchard Park. She was here for almost a month, and they were going through the divorcing proceedings, and she was with some attorney staying in the house or whatever. And they got their divorce things, and her and Greg Allman were driving back through Canada, leaving out of Toronto to fly back to LA. And I was dating my wife at the time, and I was driving my car, and there was a Lincoln Continental. Line Stretch was behind me, and he kept, every time I'd move to the right to let him pass, he'd move to the right. When I went to the left, he went to the light. He was flashing his lights on and off, and he was almost coming up to my bumper where I thought the son of a gun's going to hit me. And I figured, the son of a gun's beeping his horn. Well, my plate said hi Elvis on there, and I figured he's trying to be a wise guy. So I pull all the way over on the road on the 401, or I'm sorry, not the 401, the QEW, and the guy jumped out of the car, and I'm getting out, and I'm just a young whippersnapper, and I figured this guy, we're going to get into a fight. He goes, no, please, I didn't mean to scare you. He goes, I'm just a driver. He goes, I was told to stop you by the couple I have in the back seat. I'm sorry, but they saw your license plate, sir, please. And don't take offense to anything. He goes, the people want to know if they could take a picture of it. So I'm standing out of the car, and the door opens, and I remember it was Cher. And I remember how small she was with long, dark hair. She had a rabbit skin vest on, and she had jeans, and she had boots coming up to, they were like leather boots with sashes on them, like the Indians would wear, coming up to her knees. And Greg Allman was with her, and I remember he was a real dirty, mangy guy, but he had like a yellowish beard. And he goes, hey man, and he went to shake my hand, and she introduced herself. and Cher, and she says, I'm sorry. She goes, I was friends with Elvis Presley, and I never seen a plate like that. Could we please take a picture of it?
Aw.
And I said, sure you can. And they took a picture by my car. We got back in our cars, and I drove off. And I asked her where she was going. She says, oh, I flew in. We flew in to get our divorce. She says, we're going back. And I thought it was funny because she's with the guy she just divorced, and they're flying back in the same car, and they were going back to Pearson Airport. Yeah, that's an old memory. I remember that happening to me.
Do you think that the colonel, who's not a real colonel, do you think that the colonel was like, in a roundabout way, the death of him when he had to do all the Vegas shows and the residencies?
I don't know too much about that. We heard that the colonel at the hotels, he had carte blanche with whatever he would play. And there was millions of dollars that I heard the colonel lost. And that what Elvis made, Elvis had to cover his gambling debts. I heard that. And when they came out with that movie, with that, just came out a few years ago.
Oh, with the Butler kid.
Yeah, the Butler kid and that, they showed in the movie that was true.
And Tom Hanks as the colonel.
Yes. And, I mean, I heard that 20, 30 years ago. And so I imagine it is true. And I met the colonel several times, but it was just slow goodbye. He didn't want anybody hanging around him more than they had to, because the colonel didn't want ideas being going into his head. I heard stories about Larry Geller. Larry was close to Elvis and that. He was his hair cutter. But Larry Geller was a guru, and that he had all religious and all different books on spiritualism and everything else. And I know Elvis couldn't get enough reading the stuff, because he always wondered where he was from. And he would always ask it, and why did I live, and why did my twin brother die, and all this stuff. And this is only stuff that I heard. I never questioned him on any of that. I never asked him any of that. But it's stuff that I heard, and I would hear my aunt and uncle talk about it. And the colonel didn't want Larry Geller coming around anymore. I guess Elvis was getting out of the bathroom and he fell and hit his head or something.
Oh, man.
And he said, that's enough. And he cleared Larry Geller, told me he didn't want him around Elvis anymore. And he told Elvis, get rid of the books or I'm getting rid of you. And Elvis had to get rid of the books. There was a book that he read all the time. It was an Indian book. Started with a K, Calibran or something like that. He carried that book with him all the time. I used to see him carry that book. And he said that book gave him so much insight of where he came from and where he was going, and when you die, where you're going and all that stuff. And he had a Bible with him. And it was a Bible that, if I remember correctly, the Memphis Mafia guys gave him a Bible. I think for Christmas they gave it to him. And they all autographed the inside of it. And that's in one of the display cases, the Bible is. And I used to see them. I used to have sashes in the Bible. And I never touched it or anything, but I remember seeing the Bible. They would carry briefcases, and that Bible was always in the briefcase, because I saw that when I was in Vegas.
Cool. Very cool.
But the colonel, I don't know hardly anything about him, and that. I only hear stories of what I heard. I don't know if they're true. I imagine they probably are true. And that, how the colonel acted with Elvis. I know they got into a fight once, but who doesn't? But Elvis could have been bad if Elvis went back with them, and that. All I know is at the end, Elvis Presley Enterprises went after Colonel Parker, and they won. But I know the Elvis Presley Enterprise, they got everything locked tight and sewed up. And that, I remember in Buffalo, New York, I'm going back years ago, there was a sign that was on the Kensington Expressway, big sign, billboard, that said, it was by Jack Astor's Eatery, and it said Elvis Presley ate here. And then in small on the bottom of the border, in the corner, it said prove he didn't. And somebody must have took a picture of it and sent it to Elvis Presley Enterprises, and I think within 30 days the sign was off. And they said I heard they had to take the sign down because it wasn't true. Well, if you're going to use Elvis Presley's likeness on it, you're going to pay a royalty on it.
Yeah.
And they had to take that sign down. And that, but whatever you do with Elvis, you got to get written permission and this and that. and all that stuff. But the stuff I'm telling you is only stuff, some of the stuff I saw or that I heard or from what other people said. Some of it could be true, some couldn't. I don't know because I would never question and ask him a lot of stuff for that because we didn't see him that much. When we did see him, it was either in Vegas or we were out in Memphis and we'd go see him. And that, all I could say is that he was good. He was very good to us. He was very kind to us.
Tell me about the guitar that you got from him.
It was my birthday and that I was sitting in the living room and he had a bunch of guitars and I was just looking at them. And I asked him, are all these guitars yours? And he goes, well, a lot of the businesses and stuff will send me guitars and they want me to endorse them and I don't endorse anybody. And he just had many guitars there and I was looking at them all and he had one guitar, well, he had 5 of them. And they're all the same guitar, but they were different colors and that. And I had made a comment and I said, gee, they look like angel wings. And he goes, well, I never thought about it like that. And I liked this one guitar, I just thought it was beautiful. And I never saw a 12-string before, and I picked it up, and he said, you know how to play? And I said, no, I'm just learning. I said, I have a Stella. And he goes, what's a Stella? And I said, I don't know. My mom bought it for me. It's like $27, and he started laughing. He goes, that reminds me, I think my mom bought me. He said, my mom bought me a guitar. I think he said that they got it at the Tupelo hardware store or something like that. And he said, yeah, I had a small little guitar that I started on, and I said, yeah, I'm just starting to learn how to play in it. And we just ended like that. And then when we went to go home, my birthday would have been probably about 4, 5, 6 days later. So when I come home and they were taking the suitcases out of the car, and my uncle turned around and he goes, here, this is for you. It's a gift from Elvis. And it was one of the guitars. And it choked me up immensely. And I still have it, and I would never sell it, never. I don't care if they'd offer me $1 million for it, I wouldn't sell it. And I've been offered, people have offered me money left and right, call me all the time for it. And I never expected that from him. I got a ring, I got a belt buckle that was broken, I've got part of his karate suit, I got the patches he wore on his karate suit, I've got the guitar. My mom and sister had brooches and they had jewelry that he gave them. And then he came to Buffalo. He was at the Hilton in Niagara Falls and he was playing at the Niagara Falls Convention Center. And we went up to see him. Then we went up to the Hilton to see him in his room and that. And my sister was just tickled pink. My sister brought 2 of her girlfriends and they were having a heyday up there and at it. He was just great. Just great. And he used to love Niagara Falls. He said, I like flying over the falls. He used to have, there was a pilot, his name was Milo High. He was one of Elvis Presley's pilots. Elvis had several pilots, but Milo High was on. And they flew Elvis over Niagara Falls. And Elvis said, I had to fly over a few times. I just love looking at it. It's one of the wonders of the world. He said, when I was a young kid, I used to read in the history books about history and all that stuff where we were in class. And he said, I saw pictures of Niagara Falls, never thinking that I'd ever play Niagara Falls. I remember him saying that.
I saw pictures years ago of them working on the falls, and they stopped the water from going down in there.
Yes, I walked across the falls. It was 1969, in the summer of '69, the Power Authority, the Niagara Power Authority, they were doing a big geological survey of the falls. And when the water goes over the falls, all that falls is sandstone and slate and some bedstone. Well, the slate is very porous, and the slate breaks away. And as the water is going over the falls, when you look at the American Falls, you'll see hundreds of, or 1 million tons of rock that are down there. We got to remember that was all part of the cataract where the water went over, and all that over hundreds and thousands of years fell down there, right?
Yeah.
So the Army Corps of Engineers said the falls is disintegrating so fast we have to try and see what we could do to lessen it. So they built the Coffer Dam about 1.5 miles up the river, and they diverted the water to go over the Parachute Falls. So they stopped the water, and I was in 11th grade, and I remember our class went to Niagara Falls, and we actually walked across the falls, and the water was maybe about 4 or 5 inches deep.
Wow.
When the water is going over the falls, the water is only 1.5 to 2 feet. That's all the water is. And that people think that the water is that. No, no. The water going over the fall, but the amount of water going over, the tonnage going over is, I think they say something like 1,000 tons a second, 2,000 tons a second. We had a guy that tried to commit suicide about 10, 15 years ago. He walked to the end of the American Falls and was standing there. And they brought Captain Caffrey, who was the helicopter pilot for the sheriff's department. He hovered over, and they sent a guy to, and that's how they got him. It was on our news. And the guy was standing in water that wasn't even up to his knee. And he was standing there and that. So, yeah, the water's very shallow. But I remember when they had stopped the falls, people were actually climbing down, trying to get the diamonds and jewels and coins that were tossed over the falls for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I don't know how many people died, but several people slipped and lost their balance and died falling down there. They stopped it completely, and nobody was ever to walk over the falls again. It was shut down for months, and they made a determination they were going to put metal over the falls to try, if the water went over, the metal would never stop, but that never was done.
Yeah.
Then the water was turned back on, and they had an article just about a month ago about the falls. They said in another 100 years, the falls will be moved back probably about a half a mile. And that, because every year it moves back inches,
Yeah.
because you're losing all that stone. And they said 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, they said the falls wasn't in where it is now. It was like 4 or 5 miles away. And that's how much it's moving back. The Horseshoe Falls, I imagine, is going to do the same thing. And I was just at the falls last year with my wife. We were there, we were at the Bridal Falls. Then we went to the American, and then we went over the Horseshoe Falls and that. And it's just a phenomenal sight to see. And I live right there, and I mean, it doesn't really mean anything to me. I'm used to it, you know.
One last question for you before we conclude your stories. When was the last time you saw Elvis, and what were your last words to him, or his last words to you?
Almost a year prior, we had saw him and that. My aunt and uncle, they were visiting with him and that, and I met my uncle. God, I can't remember. I don't remember the last words I said to him or anything like that. I said hello to him, and he said hi to me and that. And I asked him how everything was going, and he said fine. I said fine. He goes, I'm going on tour. I remember saying he was going on tour, and I think that's the last words that I had with him. My uncle and my aunt talked to him privately. They were in the room talking and that, and I was just, I was sitting out there and that. I think my uncle was talking to him about Vegas. I don't know what they were actually talking about. My Aunt Edie, she was talking to him something about wardrobe, if I recall correctly. I know Bill Ballou made all his costumes, and I met Bill Ballou. He made all the jumpsuits and all the Friday costumes and everything for him. And my Aunt Edie, she was doing something with Bill Ballou or talking about something. That's as much as I remember. But I remember seeing him. He had long hair, and he had gained a considerable amount of weight. And that surprised me because he was always slim and trim when I saw him and that. But they said all the steroids he was on caused the weight. I had somebody ask me one time, you knew one of his cooks? I said, yeah, I knew the head cook, Nancy Rooks. And Nancy's husband was a cab driver. And I remember asking him, and one time he took us to the airport, and I said, hey, if your wife's the head cook for him, and you got it made, why are you a cab driver? He says, because I got nothing else to do. He goes, he paid for everything for us. I don't need anything. I just do it just to keep busy. I remember him telling me that.
Oh, yeah?
And he was a very humble black man. And Nancy Rooks, she was fantastic. She was nice. She used to call him Mr. P, Mr. P, and that. And he used to, a lot of people would call him E instead of just Elvis. I always called him Elvis and that, you know. And I remember when he sat down in the kitchen for a few minutes, and I was having tea, and I had 2 pieces of toast, and he sat down and he drank black coffee, he liked his black coffee. And I remember he ate bacon. She had bacon in the oven. She had covered up for him, and the bacon was almost burnt. I remember he liked everything well done, and he had bacon. And he had eggs. I don't know how many eggs he had, but I remember the bacon being really dark. And he sat down and he was just drinking his coffee and that, and he had this smile. If I remember anything more than anything with him, even when he wouldn't say too much, I remember the smile on his face, and he had that upper lip that would go up in the grin. That was just his trademark, and I just remember, you know, it was like he liked my sister. Linda got along with him extremely well, and he loved my sister. He said, Linda, for a blonde, you got beautiful eyes. And my sister was just smitten with him, and all her girlfriends, Linda, can we go with you? She goes, no. She goes, my family's going down to see him. We can't bring anybody. She goes, I wish we could, but she says it had, you know, we'd have to ask him. She says they don't want us asking anything. We're just lucky we're going. Can you get us an autograph? And I remember he signed a few autographs that I brought home that I gave to friends. Yeah, it was just, but seeing him up on stage, and we would sit there either on the side of the curtain or when we were in back or whatever, and you know, to see him playing there, and we'd figure how lucky we are to actually see this guy. People think he's a god, a mega star and that, but when you got to know him, no, he was just a regular person and that. And we were lucky because they'd never let anybody in to see him. And we'd walk back there, and we'd have little passes on us and that they would let us in. And when he would get done, they'd have him down, and they had like 4 rooms that were adjacent. They would open up, and all these people would be in there. And I remember sitting in back, and we always gave him his freedom, and he'd talking to everybody. And then once everybody left, you know, we would just go upstairs, and you know, we would sit, and I wasn't old enough to drink, and I just remember having some Pepsi and all that stuff on top. And I did ask him, I said, hey, do you like Pepsi or Coca-Cola? I asked him, and he goes, I like Pepsi. He goes, it's sweeter. He goes, I like the taste. Oh, this is something for you. He told me, I remember hearing the word Tiger's juice. And I always thought, what is Tiger's juice? And then I heard one of the, I don't remember which of his friends of the Memphis Mafia said, oh, Panther piss. You like Panther piss? And he goes, yeah. So, and I said, what's the difference? And he said, well, it's the same thing. It's just a slang that they use. And I said, what is that? And he said, it's Pepsi Cola, or you could put Coke and milk, and you blend it. And I said, well, doesn't it curdle? And he goes, no.
My mother used to drink that.
He says, what do you think they make milkshakes out of?
Coke float.
I says, why do you drink that? He says, when you're in Vegas and you're doing a night show, and he did like 2 to 3 shows sometimes a night, but the latest show would last sometimes to 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. Then he'd be up, you know, he'd be all, you know, amped up.
Yeah.
And I said, why do you drink that? And he said, well, the caffeine keeps me awake.